Kid of Arcadia, Part 3, Chapter 11, Went Under That Roof. They let me have one suitcase of personal things and made me leave everything else. It sat in the foyer of the foster home for a couple days while the caseworker got me settled in there. All that mattered now was whether I stayed in state care or got stuck with a relative somewhere, but I'd have nothing to do with the decision either way. Like everything else, it was all done on my behalf and had nothing to do with me. The caseworker barged me in around 8 and stuck me in a bed, and then she was long gone, and I was alone. After she had called out her dogs to drag me and Eliot away in the night, the worst night of my life if you haven't figured that out yet, now every time I thought of him, my parents are home, my stomach tore open a stitch or two. She wasn't playing around. She cited my mom and dad for their repeated and continuous neglect, and had off with us after a lot of tears and shouting. No third chances. A court date was set for my folks, so there was no telling what was going to happen or how long we'd be gone. All I knew was Eliot wasn't going where I was, and it must have been because they didn't trust me with him. I've never been to summer camp, but I know what that first night feels like so many times over. Everything was so out of place in the group home. The steel bunk springs plucked when I sat between the folded bed sheets and the flat pillow on the thin plastic mattress she told me was mine. My new allotted black desk sat opposite the bunk, chipping and worn. Just a flat top with 2 drawers sitting empty against the regulation white wall of the prison cell-sized room. My new window overlooked a fenced backyard in an overcast wet spring night behind a grid wire screen and 2 layers of glass. Everything was there, a normal room in a normal house, but none of it seemed real. Kids' voices echoed up from somewhere downstairs, laughing, fighting, and shouting a distraught dirge. But I just sat back on my new bunk that night and felt like crying. The caseworker went away, and just like that I was all alone with Mom and Dad on my mind, which was never a good thing to have when alone. But there was no escape this time. This isn't happening, I thought. Another kid shared the room, and his desk faced the opposite wall beside the door. Each of us had 2 drawers in the dresser by the bunks, both labeled with our names penciled on a piece of masking tape, his reading Josh. I didn't know who this other kid might be, but I knew I wasn't going to let him or anyone else give me any shit. If that meant getting beaten up or something, so be it. There seemed no telling what kinds of kids were living there, and I knew full well that first impressions are everything, or so I thought. I had a lot to learn. I thought of my old desk at home, with Eliot's stickers all over it, of the basketball Dad had bought me when I was little still sitting on the driveway, of my books still standing on the shelf and all the years I'd spent pouring into them before I even knew the kid. I thought about all those good guys and villains, the westerns, fantasies, and sci-fis I'd watched, those exotic escapes, those planetary voyages and the adventures with tripod they inspired when I was in the Nam jungles and no man's lands, a soldier running the trenches with a steel helmet strapped around my muddy chin. I thought of how I'd get shot in the shoulder and dragged to shelter and retreat to the jungle marsh, and how I could almost hear the helicopters chopping the sweaty summer air in the laps as they carried our wounded away. I thought of playing games in the arcade with Kelly and what could have been. It was all over. Time to grow up. And so I just lay back on that springy upper bunk at the foster home, a few feet beneath the ceiling, my face just as grubby and my eyes twice as battle-worn, remembering all at once how much fun it was. My life was over that night. This isn't happening, I thought. I tried to chase those thoughts away by focusing on the task of unpacking, but it was impossible. The suitcase they'd sent was filled with 7 changes of clothes, shirts, tube socks, underwear, shorts, and black and blue jeans. Nothing matched. Along with the clothes they packed a toothbrush, a hairbrush, and a bar of soap. The fact that the state had gone through my clothes seemed like a violation in and of itself. And actually all that lady did was flash a roll of papers when she came for us. My parents never even asked what they were. I'd like to think that they were blank forms used to scare people because she never said what they were. I'm certain they were all blank. Of all the things I took with me, nothing was more precious than the tiny photo of Eliot I'd stolen from Dad's wallet that morning. He was using it as a bookmark in his tiny green Gideon's Pocket New Testament, which was also in there, but I left that behind. The photo now rode with me, folded in half and crinkled in my pocket. Besides that and my dream journals, which they let me go back for, I didn't want anyone finding them when I was gone. I owned no remnants of my old life. But in so many ways I was glad to have nothing else. I didn't want too many reminders. I had no idea what my parents were going to do now in a house full of my remnants without me, just like I couldn't imagine what I was going to do in a world without remnants. I own nothing but my memories. Now I know how so many kids walk into those places and breathe a sigh of relief with the heartache, coming from homes they'd never want to go back to. A bright future in foster care is good enough for them, but that wasn't me. I came kicking and screaming inside, holding on to every last shred of hope that someone would take me seriously and not just shove my life through the meat grinder to save face, but I was let down. And so there I sat on the springy bunk counting the socks I had left and trying to see how I could make it all add up. That damn ceiling was so low I knocked my head on it a few times as I laid out the white sheet on the mattress, but I was still glad to have the top bunk. It was a fortress for hiding out of sight so I wouldn't have to deal with the others down on the floor when they came around. I saw why Eliot liked the top bunk so much. 20 minutes had passed since I was left alone there, and all I had to show for it was a partly made bed. The foster parent I had, an older, wiry, gray-haired woman, then peeked in the doorway. "Are you about ready, Sonny?" "Not yet," I said. "Well, you'll have to do that later. How about you meet some of the other kids you'll be living with for now?" She outstretched her bony arm like I was supposed to shake it from where I was. "I'm not ready," I said. "Well, if you wait until you're ready, you'll never be ready. And then you'll be the quiet one they all talk about. You don't want that. It's better to just get it over with. Trust me. We stick together under this roof while we're here. What else can we do? We all have things we don't want to do, and we still do them. Even me. Year after year after year." She chanted. I gulped, not budging. "Look," she said, now in a friendlier tone. "You think you're the first new kid they've seen? They all come and go. You're not going to be any different. I've been taking kids in for a long time, even back when my kids were still around. And trust me, you'll be in a worse position saying no to everything than you'll be down there with everyone else. But it's your call." She knew enough about me to treat me like a delinquent. The caseworker had really laid it on thick, and that was not a hole I wanted to get farther in, so I bowed my head in defeat, crawled over to the ladder, and climbed down the 4 metal rungs to the floor in compliance. She threw her arm around my shoulder and walked me out and down a dark hall and stairwell to the foyer below and past the kitchen, where piles of sorted laundry were stacked neatly on the table. We rounded a corner and stood beneath the stained oak threshold, where I had my first real look at the others since moving in that evening. The room was a wide cardboard box of wood-paneled walls. A sliding glass door at the far side led to a concrete patio out back, and taking up the opposite corner of the brown shag carpet rested a green sectional that seated 2 faceless kids, about my age, sprawled out on the cushions. 2 more were spread out on the floor, one folding laundry, and one belly down in front of the television like I often did, but I didn't care about them. Somewhere in another part of the house, the foster woman's college dropout son, as I came to know later, switched on a vacuum, and between the television, the talking, the cleaning, and banging about with toys, it was amazing she was able to bring it to order for even a few seconds. "Listen up, everyone. This is Jared Gallagher. He might not be staying with us long, but treat him like we treat all new ones. Josh, he's got the empty spot in your room for now. Help him get settled, okay? And Kim, it's after 8. This girl popped up off the floor, and the woman did that same shoulder hold on her before they turned away. Now I was finally cut loose in that strange waiting room world with those other kids. They all had fate haunting their dulled faces. Over all the years I ended up spending in the system, I remember how much I was told by all these people that you had options until someone signed for you, but that was a lie. Sitting around like that was always the easy part. All you had to do was hold yourself captive for a couple months or years until they figured out what to do with you. It was getting out that was the scary part, because if they failed to get you out, they just threw their hands back on your 18th birthday and kicked you to the curb. No apologies, no transition, nothing. And for that reason I remember having this horrible foreboding dread, even then, that the bridge was out down the track for me, and that my train was just barreling toward it from then on. I could blow the horn forever, but unless I switched off or braked in time, they'd someday find me down in the gulch in pieces. I could sense it the instant I was left there standing at that threshold that evening, all alone and yet with everyone else. I was never a better prophet than I was at the age of 12 that night. The 2 boys jumped up from behind the pile of folded shirts in the center and picked their own from the scramble, joking back and forth. They eyed me a moment as they stomped into the kitchen to set the last of their laundry onto their respective piles, just to zoom back across the parlor without even a second look at me. And as the woman was gone and no one important was looking, one pulled the screen door open and they bounded out to the outside darkness. They were real brothers. I knew it the second I saw them. They hadn't been separated and never would be. That's usually how it is, but not for me. At that moment I would have given anything to see Eliot among the other faces in the hot room and to have the chance to rub his back and say it was all going to work out somehow, to say sorry, but I knew that wouldn't be. They always tell you it's not your fault as a kid, but for me there was always an inescapable feeling that I had ruined him and everything. It was clear fast that none of the other kids were interested in me, and that I was just another in an endless stream of youngsters marched over to that little threshold to be left standing without direction, and that's when I realized I was in no danger. Turns out that the kids who get dragged into those homes weren't any different than me. But despite the suggestion I go insinuate myself with them, I just turned around and crept back upstairs. Those kids couldn't care less about me, and I couldn't care less about them. Surely it wasn't the first time they'd seen that either. Everything was for us, but nothing was ours. I felt like a piece of human trash thrown away. The upstairs room bobbed and bounced into the evening as I sat in the chair by the window with nausea creeping up in me all over again. That terrible Friday my stomach had grown a mold spot, and now all I wanted to do was hurl it up with whatever else was rotting down in there, which wasn't much. I curled on the chair, wrapped my arms around my legs, and pressed my forehead to my knees as air pockets pushed their way up my throat. The first night was going to be rough. At some point my new bunkmate Josh appeared in the room to calm me down. His throaty voice shot from behind. Yeah, dinner's ready. You gotta come," he said. He stared me down for a second, just a shaggy-haired preteen kid like me leaning on the doorframe, as thin as a beanpole and with purpled scrapes across his wrists. Just another one of them to me. Then he turned for the hall and ran back downstairs. After him rose the sound of spinning plates, clanking utensils, stomping, and other clatter from downstairs, and all of that was just too much for me to stomach. I slapped my hands to my forehead to wipe the sweat. "I can't believe you." I could still hear Mom in the back of my mind from earlier that evening. Her words had cut me to pieces. I felt physically wounded when I thought about it, like a sting on the skin. Earlier that evening we had been sitting in the car at a fry pit parking lot while we waited for the lady to come back with the cops. It was inevitable after we'd thrown her out the first time she came. We were actually trying to stay out of the house as long as possible in a last-ditch effort to keep them from reaching us, but it made no difference what we did. While Dad was home holding them off, Mom had been sitting in the driver's seat more upset than I'd ever seen her, shaking her head and shaming herself as she tried in vain to keep us. "I don't know," she had said. "I just can't think fast enough. If they get you guys, we'll get you back no matter what it takes, but I just won't let them take you. I can't let that happen. I might be the worst parent ever, but I can't let that happen." Every muscle in my body was tense. My knuckles were white on the handle, ready to pull me out the side door if just to get some fresh air in the dark parking lot. I knew nothing would be the same from then on, even if the cops weren't coming. "You must have done something stupid, Jared," Mom had said. "I can't believe you, man. If that lady's right, I just can't believe that shit from you. I'm just so sorry." "Mom, it's not your fault," I had said. "Oh, it's always been my fault, Jared. Don't you get that? Whatever you do is my fault. When you were born, it was my fault. When I left you alone, it was my fault. You're always going to be my fault. I knew it wasn't going to work. I knew it, but I let him talk me into it. I thought it was for the best. I should have known. Nothing's ever worked out for me." She had her head on the steering wheel and started sobbing uncontrollably. "Mom, stop it!" I shouted. "Hey, this is life. I don't care what they say about us, but I will not let them say that shit about you. And you don't let them either. Don't let them. Never let them bullshit you like they did us." She was crying, full tears. "What's going to happen?" Eliot had asked from the back seat, already in tears too. I started gasping. "Mom, I feel sick. I don't feel good." "Enough thinking," I thought. I slammed my head on the window back in the tiny white bedroom, too queasy to stand. Then another wave of nausea hit me straight from the gut, and all the guilt tore through it like an invisible bullet. Drool trickled under my jaw and down my neck, as my stomach sat in a vat of shit trying to churn 100 nails. I panted like a dog and collapsed in the chair as a surge of heat blazed up my throat and poured its acid on my tongue. In 3 heaves, I finally threw up all over myself on the floor. It had been a total ambush, and for a minute after it I froze, as sick as ever and unsure about my next move. It came on so fast I didn't even have time to pull over a basket. There was no way I could hide it or clean it myself, so I stood and tiptoed away as if fleeing a crime scene, tracking mush to the doorway, and peered up and down the hall. Everyone was downstairs. As soon as I emerged down in the kitchen soaked in slime, the woman was up there wiping in minutes. She told me not to worry about it and stuck me in the shower. All my clothes were taken after I undressed in the bathroom, and she laid out a new set by the time I was done. The warm spray poked at my electric skin, soothing it smooth, and the steam doused most of the dizziness once I learned how to work the knobs. Afterwards I shook out my hair and dried with one of the towels piled on the closet shelves. She made some on-the-spot assessments of my sickness and whisked me back upstairs to rest it off in the room where Josh was sitting on his bunk already dressed for bed and staring at me as I climbed the ladder to mine. I stretched out on the springy mattress and heard him do likewise below. "At least you spewed on your side, dude," Josh joked. A few hours passed before she turned out the lights in the hall and told us both it was lights out. An orange floodlight glowed outside somewhere nearby and lit the window shade, beaming in through the edges and streaking shadows submerged in an artificial sunset down the ceiling and walls. All was silent, and Mom and Dad were on my mind. There was nothing to do but wander my eyes over every curve and shadow on the ceiling as I tried to get used to it being the only one I was going to see every night, a far cry from the underside of my brother's bunk. There were all those little details about home to think about that I'd never noticed while there. Josh did his own thing down below, probably jerking off, and rolled over in the bunk before going quiet, but I tossed in bed a few more hours, unable to sleep or even close my eyes that first endless night. The backyard of that group home was infested with snakes. They weren't the kind that could do any damage, just little black garters slithering in the mud and crabgrass, but they had to be killed. That was something I learned quick that week. Snakes were the talk of the house, and no one could catch them like Josh, but everyone got a kick out of watching them die. He'd only been there a few weeks before I showed up, and he already had a reputation for death. Death and running away. Morning was always a chore on the weekends. First we had to make our beds and bring our dirty laundry downstairs to be washed, and then we'd receive our assignments on a rotation. One day you'd be washing dishes, drying the necks, and so on, and as kids came and went, spots opened up. The little girl was allowed to lie around with her toys on the carpet, and the brothers went out on the weekends with relatives for some reason, so I was stuck in the middle, too old to be useless and too young to be worth more than a clean plate. By the time the woman let me outside on that first day in the home, the noon sun was high, and the late April cold spot we were stuck in that weekend lingered when the wind picked up. I stepped around the old littered scraps, plywood tarps, and plastic jugs and made my way to the back fence where Josh was squatting. Beyond it sunk what seemed an endless swamp, a low point in the land with murky stream beds and thickets and a thick suburban lapse. That's where I met him for real. He was poking around beneath a shed tucked in the corner of the yard where I leaned against the fence to stare back at the house. The thing about the group home was it looked just like any address down the block. A respectable brown 2-storied side-gable foursquare with white trim and a front yard hedge. From the street it didn't look like the dumping ground it was out back, which is the side I saw. "What up, brother?" Josh asked. "Nothing." "Well, what was up last night, then?" "Nothing, just feeling sick," I said, staggering toward him. "Yeah, I get sick to get out of eating, too," he said. I wasn't sure if he was trying to make conversation, but there were just too many things already bothering me to worry about him. My eyes were low and aching after the little sleep the night before, and every nerve in my gut was still cramped. "They put your stuff in our room yet?" he asked. "Yeah." "Sucks. That means you're sticking around. If it stays in the stairs, you're a goner in no time, like those brothers are soon gonna be. See, I got psychic powers. I can see everything that's gonna happen. It's pretty rad," he joked. He was right, though. The last vestiges of a child's home and identity were often left sitting in big black trash bags beside the door as they shuffled the kid from place to place in the system. If anything, it seemed oddly fitting of the way they saw us. "I like to catch snakes. Sometimes I find them here or going around back," he said. "Why?" "They gotta be killed," he insisted, pulling his coat sleeves down as if to hide the purple scrapes across his wrists. "How long you been here?" I asked. "Here?" He sprung up on his knees. "A few weeks. It's not my first roof, though." Listening to him talk with all his irreverent, zonked-out, pill-fed pseudo-wit in the heat of all this chaos made me want to go smash a window or something, anything to get a message across to these people, to someone human. I kept having this feeling that at any moment my folks were just going to show up and tell me they had made a deal with the courts somehow so that I could go back home, but all my hopeless shock then spit from my eyes in tears instead, almost cutting him off. "It sucks. It fucking sucks. I can't take this." I rubbed my eyes dry in my palms and slinked to the foot of the chain-link fence as Josh looked on, caught in the crossfire. "I didn't fucking hurt him. I couldn't hurt that kid. I never really hurt him," I croaked, wiping my eyes. I didn't expect Josh to understand and didn't care what he thought about it. The wind picked up in the leaves and made them sway in the sunbeams poking out through the overcast. It howled over the roar of the cars in the distance, droning ceaselessly this hollow background breath. I wanted to be anywhere but there. "Yeah, go sulk. That's smart. That's going to help. When they find you, you get sent to therapy." He shook his head. "But I gotta do something. I can't be here. That's what nobody gets," I said. "It's not the end of the world, man. It's just a different roof. Figure it out. In fact, you should be relieved. You got no more folks to worry about," he said, crawling over and throwing himself down near the fence beside me. "Relieved? You must be new to this. See, this woman, she ain't your parent. She's a fill-in. All you gotta do is school and get back on time. Everything else is up to you. If you do it right, you can get away with loads. 'Cause these people, man, you don't do what they want, they just lock the door. You cause a scene, they just call the cops. If you do it right, you can have it lots of ways without getting pushed around too much," he explained. "Right, I'm not stupid. Don't think you can get me in trouble," I shot back. "Okay, we share a room. You get in trouble and I get locked in with you. Why would I want that? I'm just saying, when it happens, and it's gonna happen, just tell her you'll tell the cops about the bare wires and the cold showers. Some just like the state money. They're slow on repairs and it's always bare minimum anyways. They don't use shit unless they have to. And you gotta keep your eyes open. If you see her do something that's really fucked up, you just tell the cops about it the second they get called on you and you'll be fined," he told me. "That works?" "Sometimes. But it usually just lets them know that you're too smart to fuck with, because they will fuck with you. I got your back, buddy. Couple weeks and you'll be just like me." I was about to comment when some new blonde kid scraped the sliding glass door open and emerged on the concrete. He threw it shut and leaned against the house, eyeing both of us from his place at the other end of the yard. Josh clapped his hands and patted his pants like he was doing a gun search on himself, and then started out in the other kid's direction. "What'd I tell you? Looks like you're not the new kid anymore. Those brothers are definitely gonzo. See ya," he said. His words buzzed in my ear like a mosquito, and I couldn't shake them. No more folks, I thought. At first it struck me pale. Folks were always the reason anything got done. Folks were why I had the friends I did, the neighborhoods I lived in, and the TV I could get away with watching. Even though folks were rarely around for me, no matter how far I'd been, I knew I could always at least go home. And so it was that I'd be freer to go anywhere than I had ever been, just to have nothing to care about once I got there. I had traded one for the other. Later that week we were all spit through the courts, and they threw the charge of repeated and continuous neglect at both my parents in a civil hearing. I was only present in the back of the room with the caseworker for the day, but I remember how most of it went, even if I couldn't understand it. Eliot was on the other side. Apparently we were too young to be left alone all those weekends, and it was proving detrimental to our immediate welfare. My parents were also determined to have exhibited repeated resistance to rectifying their situation over the years, whatever that meant, so the caseworker's condition for the removal was justified in the eyes of the state. Mom and Dad had a year max to prove they could pick up the slack. No relatives were appointed as suitable replacements at the time, at least for me, although they said that might be subject to change. Any question about my conduct behaviors was reserved for a future hearing if deemed necessary after psychological evaluation, so I'd just be in this foster home limbo land until all that fell through. Eliot would be treated apart from me because he needed special care and because we were only half-brothers and didn't need to be kept together. Not that it would have mattered. And just like that, it was all over. If only the state had known how much they dropped the ball by not going after me then, they all would have been as adamant about dragging me down as the caseworker was in the coming weeks. Hell, they would have saved themselves a lot of time. Even with her conduct disorder implications against me on the burner, I still felt sick about what I had done to him. "This isn't over, son. Not for you," the caseworker told me as she led me out of court that day. "There's still the matter of these conduct issues we have to address, and like I always say, start with the parents, finish with the kids." I can still hear Eliot crying from the other end of the marble hall. It's up there ready for recall at any time. Now he realized how much they all had lied to him. When the woman grabbed his hand, he fought back, sobbing and screaming, "Daddy! Daddy!" as she carried him out of the room. And as I sat on the small bench, I must have convinced myself power was what I always really wanted, because for every night thereafter, getting any tiny bit of it was all I could think about.